I haven't been back for, it's got to be 40 years. Oh my God, I remember this completely. Wow. We were incomers when we lived in the bungalows. These were the proper villagers who lived in this kind of property, you know. Spinny view. I'm staggered that so much is exactly as it was all those many, many years ago. Growing up in Knowsley, it's slightly odd because the Knowsley that I grew up in was a much, much smaller Knowsley than when you use the word Knowsley today, because Knowsley was, for me, just a tiny estate that of prefabricated houses that had been built very close to what's still known as Knowsley Village. And it was built to house munitions workers during the war. And the idea was that this Knowsley Maypole estate would be demolished after the war because they were pretty substandard, I mean, really, really substandard housing. But that never happened. And so I found myself being brought up on this estate that was all peopled with Liverpudlians. But although they were Liverpudlian speaking, this little estate had been built right in the middle of the most beautiful kind of rural setting. So on the one hand, I had a very kind of urban culture because of where the people came from who lived there. And on another level, I had a very, very rural culture because I'd step outside this, prefabricated bungalow, and within 30 seconds, I'd be in the middle of just kind of endless fields. It was all built on Lord Derby's land. And fields that just stretched from kind of there right the way out beyond St Helens and as far as the eye could see. So it was a very mixed kind of urban come rural upbringing. I moved about a fair bit when I was a kid. My parents were kind of slightly mixed marriage in so much as my dad was what's still known as a woollyback, i.e. he came from beyond the Liverpool accent speaking area. He'd been born in Up Holland. And my mother was from Dovecot, Liverpudlian family, and they'd met because they were both really good and enthusiastic dancers, and they'd met it was in the days of kind of ballroom dancing, and they'd met and got married, and so we lived originally in Rainhill. I was born in Wiston Hospital, which is just down the road in Rainhill, so the first house I was living in was this house in D Road, Rainhill, which I remember really, really well, but I haven't been back even to Rainhill for, it's got to be 40 years. So the chances, I can't remember the number of the house that we lived in. We were pretty poor, because I know that my dad and some of my uncles used to go down onto the railway track at night, and when the open carriage coal trucks were coming by, they'd stand at the side of the track with big pieces of wood and try to, get bits of coal to fall off the carriages so that they could collect the coal when the train had gone by and have some coal, because nobody was particularly wealthy. I mean, we didn't, like everybody says, we didn't feel particularly poverty. We weren't poverty stricken. I didn't feel particularly poor because everybody on the estate lived basically in the same way, I started school there. Remember that very well. The teacher presented me with this bottle of milk. Well, I knew what milk was, but I'd never had a straw in my life, and she handed out these straws, and I saw the rest of the kids putting the straws in the bottles and putting their mouths to them, and the milk going down. I thought, oh, that's interesting. So I blew instead of sucked, and the milk went absolutely everywhere. And the terrifying day that we were told that we had to have the vaccination. I mean, I didn't even know just the word seemed to strike fear into the hearts of us all. It must have been the time of the great polio epidemic, and it must have been inoculation against polio. And incredible the things that you remember. I can't remember a time when my mother didn't tell me stories. She'd make up stories. She always wrote verse and little stories, often, you know, sentimental verse. As a kid, I loved all that. I loved the fact of being told stories. When all the rest of the aunties and the uncles were around, stories were told. That's just how things were. I'm just coming up now to Wiston Hospital, which is where I was actually born. Very different now. It was an old soot-encrusted Victorian building. This place, the Green Dragon pub, next to it is a famous cafe there called the Green Dragon. And when I came for the really long stay in this hospital was when I was 4 or 5. And my mother brought me down here one day, and it was a bitterly cold day. I remember my feet had got frozen. And I was so cold on the bus coming here. My mum said, look, don't worry, when we get there, we'll see the doctor, and then we'll go to the Green Dragon Cafe, and we'll have some milky coffee. And I just couldn't wait to get this hot, milky coffee inside me. Anyway, we got to the hospital, and the doctor said, admit him immediately. And I remember screaming as my mother left, saying, I want a coffee, I want a coffee. And it's interesting the way these things come back. In The Wrong Boy, my novel about Raymond Marx and him and his mum, and I'd never thought of that when I actually wrote it, but him and his mum, their moments of happiness are always characterised by toast and milky coffee. So I think that's probably a hangover from all those years ago, the Green Dragon. When we lived out here in Raid Hill, my dad, who was a Wiganer, when he said, I'm getting the buzz, I'm going to town, he would be going to St Helens. Whereas my mother, if my mother was going to town, you're going to Liverpool. If I've got this right, then I've got to take her right fairly soon. There's Raynham Station, remember that well. That's the first time that memory's come to me in, so many years. And as I remember it, I'm going to take this, I remember it. View Road, this is where, that was my school, in fact. It's now called the St Anne Centre. That's the first school I ever went to. Oh my God, I remember this completely. Wow. Wow, yeah, I certainly remember this. I remember being in this playground, in fact. Incredible. Wow, I didn't think for a second that all this would still be here. My last memory of being here is being in this very playground on what felt like a summer's day. And I can't remember what the games were that were being played, but I remember being part of that thing where an entire playground, the boys and the girls, seemed to be playing the same game. And it was just a fantastically kind of idyllic, pleasant English sunny day in a schoolyard. I always thought it was called View Road School because it's in View Road, but it was called St Anne's Juniors all those years ago.
I don't have time to write a long letter and tell you.
Wow. Classrooms are all gone, of course, but it's still the same building. Yeah, that's exactly as it was when I was here all those years ago.
But the few good friends who stood beside me say you
Oh, I remember this room. Yeah, must have been, oh, this was the hall. We must have done assemblies in here, and we must have had lunches in this room.
Learning to get by without
Oh, I see, because some kids were bussed in by coach to here.
cry about you these days.
Yeah, that's pretty much as it was in my day. But you see, they've retained all these lovely arched windows and what have you, which I certainly remember. Well, I'm amazed that it's still here, but even though it's not functioning as a school anymore, the building's still here, and I'm quite astounded that I remember it as being exterior, externally anyway, as it was.
These days, I know
And do you know, I can remember the exterior of the church, but I don't remember being in the church. And we would have done, surely.
Yes, there's strong links between the school and the church that's been on.
St Anne's, wasn't it?
Yeah, and the kids used to come over. We still get a lot of kids coming over from the new build school over there.
I moved away when I was 5. I moved to Knowsley, and this is my first time back in all those years.
Goodness me, it's lovely to find that actually some things haven't changed.
Absolutely.
But I think this has changed for the better by taking an old derelict building and the vision.
Had it gone derelict? Had it been
Yes,
left?
it had been pretty. It was pretty shabby inside.
Right.
So around '98, people had a vision to turn this into a community centre.
Great.
They raised funds, and then just after the millennium, they opened up, and it's used by
And you can see
numerous groups.
it's well used.
Oh yeah, very very well used. Yeah.
This is very familiar. This is the kind of housing that I lived in. I wonder if this is it. Let's have a look. Oh, now this looks very like it. Oh, there you go. So it's D Road. So, yeah. Now, as I say, I can't remember the exact. It was probably this block here. With you see what the entry running between the houses. So it would have been that or that. Wow. And then over on the left here, that's all been built on now, but there used to be a park there. Of course, everything seems tiny now. Yeah, the park's still there, my goodness me. Wow, that seemed vast to me when I was a kid. Wow, that's incredible. That's almost completely unchanged. When we were in Rainhill, I just started school and I got ill with something called nephritis, which is nothing today, it's just a kidney thing, and it's cleared up with antibiotics and that's that. But in those days, you had to be hospitalised, and just before I'd gone into hospital, my dad had gone out to Canada, because I think the idea was that we were all going to move out to Canada. And for some reason, he changed his mind about that, whether it was because I was hospitalised. I seemed to be in hospital for months and months and months. As I remember it, it may have been a month, but it felt like, as it does when you're a young kid. When I came out of hospital, shortly after that, I left Rainhill and we moved into one of these prefabricated bungalow houses. So we're heading back to Prescott, which was in my childhood a significant town. We went there to shop. There were department stores there, there were cinemas there. Now this, if I've got this right, this is the Prescott Town Centre. There we go. There was a football team here called Prescott Athletic. I don't know if they're still going. And I had an uncle or somebody in the family who played for them. And in later years, when I became a real kind of football supporter, my dad had reminded me of this ancestor or forebear or relative who played for Prescott. And of course, I used to think it was just appalling, playing for a club that wasn't even in the league. When I was at school, I became aware very early on that the only subject that really grabbed my attention and which I knew I was good was English. I remember very, very early on reading aloud a story. We'd all in the class had to write a story, and I'd written a story and I put jokes into it. And when I read it out loud, it actually got laughs from the rest of the kids. I mean, I was aware of that at a very, very early age, that you could do that kind of thing, you know. This was Longview Lane. There was a school along here called Longview, and some of the kids from my estate, Knowsley, went here. Tom Evans, my great friend, who went on to be part of Badfinger and co-wrote the song Without You, the Harry Nilsson song, used to come to Longview School here. Oh, Longview School's still here, incredible. Wow, it's now called Knowsley Lane Primary School, but that's where the Longview School was. I came to a school just a bit further along here that was called Knowsley Woolfall, and I hated it with a vengeance. Just surviving playtime and dinner hour, you know, was bad enough. And we were looked upon as kind of low life because we didn't even come from this area. We were bussed in from Knowsley village. And anyway, I left there under a bit of a cloud, not of my making. I'd been, towards the end of the term, I'd been playing, you know, with a mate of mine and kind of wrestling and doing all the kind of stuff you do when you're a kid. And when this mate of mine got home that night, his white shirt, there was blood all over the collar. In fact, what had happened is he'd had a boil on his neck. And when we'd been, you know, kind of playing cowboys and Indians or soldiers or something and had a tussle, this boil had burst and he'd gone home and his mother went mental. And he, you know, he had to pass it off as somebody being blamed for it. How did that happen? And he said, you know, I was fighting with Billy Russell. So, unbeknownst to me, the next day she turned up at the school with her husband telling the headmaster that I'd brutalised her son. And the next thing I knew is somebody came into the class and said, Billy Russell's got to go to Mr. Torrance's room. So Billy Russell dutifully went down to this headmaster's room, you know, and saw these people standing there. And the next thing is I was grabbed by the neck, I was put over his desk, and I was given 6 strokes of this cane. We were used to getting a cane on the hand, you know, but he kind of leapt across the room to hit me with this cane. And it brought tears to my eyes. I didn't actually cry because you didn't, you know. Anyway, that night I got home and I went round to my Auntie Dolly's. My mother would have been at work. And when my mum came round, I called in for my tea and I sat down with my cousin. As I went to sit down, I winced. And it was, what's wrong with you? What's wrong? I said, not, you know, embarrassed, you know. And anyway, they tried to get me to reveal what had happened. And, you know, I had to take my trousers down. In fact, he'd drawn so much blood that my pants were stuck to me, you know. And then 6 weeks later, I went back to the school, and on the first day found that I wasn't on any register in any class that I went to. And by lunchtime, just after lunchtime, I got in and this teacher said to me, "You're not at the school any longer." Do you know the feeling of, I didn't know where I should be, but the relief that I wasn't in this hellhole any longer. So I went home that night, and I'd been transferred to Rainford, and people would at least ask you if they wanted to fight with you instead of just chewing you up. And that's how I ended up getting out of this appalling Woolfall Heath School, which I'm delighted to say has been completely and utterly obliterated from the landscape. I was fantastically shy as a kid. I'd been, up to the age of 10, like most kind of young kids, you don't think of, well, you didn't in those days, you didn't think of how you look, you know, how the outside world looks at you. But I remember when I was 10 or 11, a relative saying to me, what a pity you didn't get your mum or your dad's looks. And my mum and dad were, you know, famously really good looking. And it was such a crushing thing. I still remember it. Because as I say, I had no, you know, I'd be out playing football all day, running around, you know, and I was a kid. And then When this was said to me, I transformed that into, I'm an ugly kid. Because, you know, that kind of thing. And so my teenage years were spent thinking, oh, you know, no girl's ever going to fancy me, no girl's ever fancy me. Years later, after I'd written Shirley Valentine, and the woman whose name I'd borrowed, there was a girl at school called Shirley Valentine. I'd borrowed Shirley's name, thinking that all these years on, she wouldn't be Shirley Valentine anymore. She'd have become Shirley MacFarland or Shirley Grizzler or Shirley, you know, whatever. And after the play came out, my sister was working at the box office at the Everyman. She came on one day, she said, I just had a booking for 13 tickets for next Saturday's show in the name of Shirley Valentine. And Shirley, in fact, I met her, it was great, fantastic. And she was with 12 other girls, all of whom would, it's an incredible coincidence this, all of whom would go away every year, respectively telling their husbands and partners they were going to somewhere like Bournemouth. And they'd have prepared a whole load of postcards from Bournemouth or wherever that they would give to people there who would post them back to their husbands and partners while they were all in Ibiza or New York or wherever. She was doing a much bigger thing than the Shirley Valentine of the fiction. But in the conversation after with Shirley afterwards, she said, oh God, she said, so many of us fancied you when we were at school. I went, oh, now you tell me. This place, Knowsley Village, which we're just going to head down to now, which is on the signpost there. The lane runs parallel now with the wall to Lord Derby's estate, which stretches for miles. It's a vast estate, and I used to spend idyllic summers in there because I was part of the Boy Scouts that were called Lord Derby's Own, and we used to stay sometimes for most of the summer holidays in the park, and it was just incredible. You can see if you drive along here, I often make the point, nobody ever picks up on it, that my upbringing was absolutely as much, if not more, rural in terms of location than it was urban. When the prefabricated bungalow houses that I lived in when I moved from Rainhill, when they were eventually knocked down as unfit for human habitation, we moved here to a purpose-built estate that was called the Sugar Lane Estate, still is called the Sugar Lane Estate. And I lived on Home Farm Road. And I'm just looking for 77, if I can find it. So that must be 70, that's 71, 73, 75. 77. And yeah, I lived here from, it would have been about 1960, 61 till late 65. And it's where I spent my early teenagehood. And I began writing songs, in fact, in that house there. I remember I've got a picture, I was still in the Boy Scouts in those days. And I remember meeting a girl at a party with whom I started a kind of thing. And I phoned her one week. I mean, I was really, really, you know, delighted to have this girlfriend. But I remember phoning her from a phone box down in the middle of the village, and said I couldn't see her because I had a scout meeting. And as I said it, I could hear that it sounded to somebody slightly older. Like, you might have to readjust your priorities from now on, you know. So it was shortly after that that I gave up me woggle and me beret.
Oh, mama, we're gonna keep it in the family. Mama.
Berry Hill Avenue, my great friend Dave Bell, who used to be in the Kirby Town 3, lived here. That's where my granny lived, over there. Longborough Road, my great mate Tom Evans, who co-wrote Without You, lived just down there. Derek Edwards, the other member of the Kirby Town 3, lived over here on the left. In fact, Derek and Dave lived 4 or 5 doors away from each other. My great friend Mike Stacey lived in that house on the corner. And I remember being in that house when a girl first broke my heart by finishing with me. Oh, the cricket club's gone by the look of it. Oh, is that it there? No, it's gone. What a shame. That's where I first rehearsed with the Movers. This was St John's Club up here. Is it still there? Yeah. We rehearsed in there as well. Yeah. St John Fisher. Yeah. We'd gotten into Dylan by then. When I was with that early group that I wrote my first song, and I went in and I think I probably played it to the group as if it was an existing song, i.e. not by me, and it passed, you know, I mean, they were okay to sing and do the song, and so the song became, for a short while, became a part of our set. There were 30 to 40 kind of folk clubs that you could go to without leaving the Merseyside area. Just a room above a pub, you know, I mean, nothing grand where you'd have anything from like 30 to 300 people assembled. And if you were a young hopeful, like I was, you could put your name down for floor spots. So you had, for example, the Spinners group had a club in West Derby Road in a pub called Gregson's Well. And I went. I wasn't a great Spinners fan, but I went there because it was, you know, listen to music. And unbeknownst to me, in the interval, a mate of mine went up to Mick Groves as a Spinners and gave my name as someone who'd do a floor spot. I mean, I wasn't ready at that time. I'd written a few songs. I'd written a few comic songs, parody songs, and I'm sitting there, you know, just watching, and the Spinners start the second half, and then starts announcing the floor singers. And the next thing is, my name's announced, and like, what? So I get up and I borrow Mick's, you know, Gibson guitar. I've never held a Gibson guitar in my life, you know, it's worth hundreds of pounds, and I was playing a chopped up cheese grater, really. And so it was incredible, all this. And I started playing this song. It was a comic song, as I say. And I mean, I was terrified. And it was almost like an out-of-body experience. And I heard this out-of-time drummer, I thought, and it was my knees knocking together, I think. It was that kind of thing. But at the same time, I could hear gales of laughter coming from this audience at the point, you know, where the song was trying to get its laughs. And this is the lodge that we used to use to go to our scout camp. And there were only about 10 of us in the troop. I had a key to here, and some of my most idyllic memories are of time spent in Knowsley Park, and we had access to all of this private land. I mean, beginning the summer holidays, 3 or 4 of us would turn up, check in with the lodge, go to the boathouse, get the tents out, pitch a camp there, dig out to make the trench fires, stuff like that, and just live there. Occasionally we'd go home to change our clothes or what have you, you know. But when the weather was fair, we'd just stay for weeks on end, and it was absolutely fantastic. It was great.
Any father would be glad to know.
There's nothing left of the estate that was demolished, but we'll try and find it anyway.
He would forgive you.
Knowsley Lane. This is the lane, and running parallel on the other side of these bushes was Knowsley Drive, looking out, and everything is still there as it was when I was a kid. My house was just over that fence where that huge industrial unit now is. My house was just over there, and the whole of the Maypole estate was on the other side of here, just down to the corner. There were about 350 of these rotting bungalows on that side.
Oh no, no, no. Don't say a word.
If anybody has read The Wrong Boy and knows the fly trapping sequence, it's the only truly autobiographical thing in the book, and it actually took place in Mill Lane Woods by the River Alt. And these fields are where we used to go, this field particularly, we used to go pea picking in the pea season, spud picking in October. And our houses were just opposite here. God, this is just, I'm staggered that so much of this is exactly as it was all those many, many years ago. I remember this was a great lover's lane for those of us when we just learnt how to drive, you know. That was a great place for parking up. It looks like it still is. Not for me though.
The bombed out slag of a media hag is giving it some Willy. The pitch.
We used to play footy on that meadow. And I remember there was a day where we were playing the village team and I was playing for our team, Maypole, and my dad was brought in. The referee didn't turn up, so they asked my dad, who'd never refereed in his life before, to referee. And in his anxiety to be seen to be absolutely scrupulously fair and not show any nepotism towards me, when I scored a perfectly legitimate goal, he disallowed it. I can still remember the row at home. It went on for days. I was beyond. The first piece of work that I wrote that actually referenced where I lived or where I'd been brought up was the first piece of work that I consider my first serious writing outside of the song form. And it was, I got very into the work of Robert Burns when I was a teenager because of Scottish connections. And I had got to know his great long ballad poem, Tam O'Shanter. I sat down and I started to update, translate it, and it became a piece of mine called Sam O'Shanker. And instead of it being about a guy, a drunkard in the 18th century who has to get back from his long night in the boozer, he has to get back on his horse and he has to go past church and the witches and the devil or the. I set the whole thing in the now, and this is where his car, Sam's van, breaks down, and the van breaks down here, and he has to get out, and in the pouring rain and the howling wind, he sees the devil with a guitar, electric guitar, in the middle of that graveyard, and all around him, witches start this erotic, massively erotic dance, and Sam is absolutely transfixed looking at this in his inebriated state. And one witch starts to throw off all her clothes as she's dancing and dancing and dancing. And then it looks like she's not going to take any more off, and Sam forgets where he is and what he's looking at and shouts out, "Go on there, love, get the rest off." And of course then they're all on him. The witches and the devil chasing him, flying out down Knowsley Lane. He's desperately trying to reach the River Alt because he knows that if he can get to water, witches and spirits and devils can't cross over running water. So he's motoring down here like, and then he looks in the mirror and he sees a Ford GT coming up behind him, and the devil is driving it with the witches on the bonnet waiting to get him. Anyway, this is the Derby Arms pub where I had my first ever pint. When you drank back in the day, there was an etiquette to drinking. There was a behaviour. I mean, being able to hold your own, you know, was a compliment. Not, oh, I got slaughtered. The fact that you could drink and know your limit. The fact that you didn't mix certain drinks because you'd made. All the law of drinking was kind of handed down, not in a formal way, but you learnt things like that, you know. At the insistence of my father later on, I went to sit the exam for getting into the printing trade because that was considered, like becoming a draftsman, it was considered to be a really kind of working class aspirant thing to do, get in the printing trade, you're set up for life. But by that time, I'd discovered the Cavern, and I'd discovered the Beatles playing there, and they had lunchtime sessions, so for a very moderate fee, you could go and listen to the Beatles for 2 hours in the Cavern, and I was supposed to go sit this printing exam in the Blue Coat Chambers, which was just round the corner from, where the Cavern was. And I remember going in there and opening the examination paper, and it had that question that was something like, if it takes 3 dogs 4 months to eat 25 pounds of sausage meat, how many flies does it take to eat a banana, and that kind of thing. I mean, to this day, I see that kind of question and I glaze over. So I think I just, closed the paper and went to the Cavern and saw the Beatles. And then at some point, my mother came home and she said to me, do you fancy being a ladies' hairdresser? Well, I didn't particularly, but it meant going to a kind of hairdressing college for a year. And I thought, oh, well, that buys me a bit of time. And, it's college, it was a bit arty. It was, I was kind of beginning to develop a sense of kind of wanting to, I was secretly writing by this time, just bits and pieces. Never thought of myself could be a writer, but I'd become aware of a kind of, I suppose, artistic strain that was growing. And this is Kirby Industrial Estate, and this is where we moved in about late 1965, early 66. My dad had a fish and chip shop at the Admin. In those days in Kirby, there was a massive industrial estate. And my dad had this chippy that basically fed the industrial estate. It wasn't open in the evening because it was it emptied this industrial estate in the evening. But there were thousands and thousands of workers used to be bussed into these factories, the ICI and Connolly's and Blackley's and Otis Elevator and all kinds of places like that. And because he'd moved, because he was working in the chippy there, he bought his first house in a little estate that predated the much bigger Kirby. I remember at the time being aware that some people tried to distinguish where they lived from Kirby proper by claiming that they lived in Simmons Wood. I don't know if they still do that stuff. And the house we lived in was just over there, a place called Spinney View. This is the Spinney Road Estate, which is where we lived. She gave me jump on fever. She gave me green moose tea. Spinney View. I lived here from about 1965, late 1965, I think, to 1969, yeah. And did a hell of a lot of writing in the back room, top bedroom. Did a lot of playing, was playing with the Kirby Town 3 when I was living here. And by that time we'd moved away from the social clubs and we were playing the folk clubs proper, that kind of stuff. I remember being in the back shed. I had my first ever 5-string banjo and practicing out in the back shed there. I also started to write poetry while I was here. Don't ask to see any of it. And I started writing a lot of verse, ballad verse, and I think I wrote my first sketches that I sent off to the BBC, who rejected them really rather kindly, but rejected them nevertheless when I was here. I was obviously spreading my wings and trying to write different kinds of stuff when I was living in this particular house. It didn't get serious until I'd moved on from this house, but certainly the beginnings of it were here. It's very near to the row of shops where my dad ran the chip shop. So should we go and take a look? She gave me jump on fever. I certainly didn't want a factory life, and if nothing else, then the hairdressing got me out of doing that. And when I was 17, my mother by this time, next door but one to my father's chip shop in Admin Road, she had a draper's shop selling, knitting and knitted gear and woolens and all that kind of stuff and clothing. But one night it was, a lorry was backed through the window and the shop was emptied, and she had no insurance, so she just had an empty shop. And so in order to help her pay off her debts, got a few dryers and a few sinks and that kind of stuff. And I set up a hairdresser's shop there. And I ran that for about 2 or 3 years. Now, this is the industrial estate, right? Now, this, when I was a kid, was absolutely vast. I mean, tens of thousands of people worked here. And this is Admin Road, it's called the Admin. And this is where my dad's chip shop was. And that was in that shop there. And then next door but one was where my mother's draper's was, until it was looted one night and there was nothing left. And I took it over and it became my hairdresser's shop. And incredibly, after all these years, I left there in 1968. It's now a barber's. Wow. You're Alan?
Yeah.
I'm Willy.
Hi. Okay.
It's incredible.
Been talking to one of the guys from the estate just round the back, and he said that somebody had this, and it was ladies' hairdressers.
It was ladies' hairdressers, yeah. Called
Yeah.
Marjorie's,
Yeah.
after my mother,
Yeah.
because my mother owned the shop
Yeah.
before I put the hairdressers in here. I used to have my sinks over there, and I used to work round about here with my mirrors here.
Yeah.
And I used to have a little pot stove in the back as well.
I just got a microwave. It's easier.
Who plays the uke?
I try.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was a singer for years and years. So
Oh, right, with whom?
I did an Elvis tribute act.
Wow.
Hence the mirrors and
Fabulous.
photographs of Elvis and everything. Yeah, I did that for 25 years.
Wow.
Loved it. We could
Isn't
do
that
it
incredible?
again.
See, when I was here, I was in the back, I put the clothes sign up, right, going about writing songs.
Yeah.
Because when I was here, I was playing the folk clubs,
Yeah.
with a group called the Kirby Town 3,
Right.
and all these years on, same thing's happening.
Hence, there's a little
I saw your amp,
down
yeah, you got a
there,
little guitar amp. Fantastic.
Yeah, it's good fun.
Well, I better sit down and have my hair done now then.
Recognize me these days. I'm learning to get by without you. Learning.
Whenever I was in the hairdressers and wasn't busy, I'd be in the back room writing away, and that's where I began the adaptation of the Burns poem Tam O'Shanter, which is I think of as the first kind of serious non-songwriting piece that I did. That's the first piece that I thought, oh, this is something substantial, as it were. We used to practice in the back room of the hairdressers. Obviously, if a customer came in, I had to stop practicing and tell the others to shut up while I went out to do a perm or a set or a tint or something like that. But it was quite a little den for us folkies, the back room of the hairdressers there. Later on, when I got into the kind of folk club world, I found I was mixing with people who, had gone on to sixth form, had gone on to university, had gone on to teacher training college. I was mixing with middle-class people and professionals, people who worked as teachers, people who worked as librarians, that kind of thing. I'd met my to-be wife, Annie, and she was at training college, trained to become a teacher. And because of the influence of her family, and lots of other people I met in the kind of folk club world, I decided that I'd try and become a teacher, because if I became a teacher, you have 13 weeks off a year, loads of time to write. I didn't realise then that you don't have anything like that amount of time with marking and all that kind of stuff, But I think that was the very kind of plan. And so I decided to go back and dip my toe into education again. I came here and I enrolled for a night class in English literature. And that was my route back to studying and route back to eventually taking a full course in Chilwell Hall County College for a year, doing all my rest of my O levels and A level, and then from there going on to St Catherine's College and learning to be a teacher, qualifying to be a teacher. But it all started here in Kirby Town Centre. And so when I did start writing, I was very aware that no matter what kind of writing I did, even if it was, and I was starting to try and write bits for the theatre, and I was certainly trying to write television plays, I wanted to write work that would speak to the people who were like me, who didn't go to the theatre, who didn't go to the ballet, who weren't versed in literature, but who felt as passionately and as deeply about things and cared just as much as people who had. Now, at the same time, neither did I ever want to alienate the people who did love literature and who did go to the theatre. I was never, I never wanted to celebrate the kind of life and the voices that I knew and came from at the expense of the kind of culture that was represented by Michael and Margaret, my in-laws, who'd been so fantastically encouraging to me and had opened up all kinds of thinking and doors and opportunities to me. I mean, they were middle class, but they were very left leaning, middle class, librarian and a lecturer. But they embraced, if you like, working class culture as much as they embraced middle class culture. And it seemed to me that that was the way, that you want to speak to everybody. You don't just want to write the kind of play that only has meaning for a certain person who has a certain foreknowledge. Now, and I'd often watch plays like that because by this time I'd started going to the theatre, because Annie, who I was going out with at this time, went to the theatre, a matter of course. And I'd sit through these things and I'd think, oh, it's me. I don't understand it. I'm bored beyond rigidity at what, numb-bummed beyond belief. But I wouldn't think, God, what an awful play. I think, it's me. I don't understand that. I've seen so many people, I heard so many people go, I haven't been to this, but it's beyond me, It's too much for me. And it's not beyond you. It's a bad piece of work, because if it's not speaking to you, it shouldn't be on stage, What's been really surprising is to go back to so many places from my childhood and to see that they're still there, and they are almost exactly as preserved in my memory. And I so wasn't expecting that, because the fact that actuality matches the memory has been quite extraordinary, really.